Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
And big thanks to our sponsors, Mackie, Roland, Mojave Audio, Ozbot.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Daniel Liston Keller. I am the chair of AES LA and the host of the Insights in Sound podcast. And my guests today are the authors of Buzz Me In, Mr. Martin Porter, and Mr. David Goggin.
Hi. Very nice to see some friendly faces out there again. Thank you for coming.
And the rest of you, too. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, I'm here all week.
Let the show begin.
Yes. First of all, let's get a little bit of background on this book, because you've done a hell of a lot of research on this book.
10 years. Took us 10 years.
Yeah.
It started about, Stone, those of you who know me, know I've been in this business, and so has he been in the business forever, right? And 1978, I was an editor of a magazine some of you may remember called Pro Sound News.
Oh my God!
Remember Pro Sound News?
No, Pro Sound News.
Yeah, all you young guys. There's no young people in this room anywhere. Is there any young people in this room? Raise your hand. Okay. Yeah, Robbie. Okay.
Yeah.
So you young and don't remember. So Stone.
This guy was my editor.
Chris Stone in those days was, if those of you who may remember Chris, was one of the, he was one of the dons of the business, right? There was a little mafia running around in those days called Spars in the recording studio business, right? And Stone and Joe Tarzia and Mac Emmerman and those guys, and they had the town, the whole country wrapped up, right?
Got that right.
Right. But Stone was a great storyteller, and he knew how to mix drinks. And we would drink, and he would tell stories, and I would say, Stone, you gotta write a book. You gotta let me write this book. And he said, Porter, I'm never gonna let you write this book. This book is going to the grave with me. This stories are going to the grave. And you know what? Every time I'd see him, I would say it. And then about 10 years ago, I started working out here a lot. I'm a New Yorker, as you can tell, right? And I started coming out, and I'd stop over, see Stone. He'd tell stories. We would drink, and I could see him sort of softening a little bit. And then one day, I end up in his backyard in Hancock Park, and Bonzai shows up. Now, Bonds can tell. We all know who the famous Bonzai is, right? All right. He, besides being columnist and a man about town in the studios, he was Stone's consigliere, right? He was his buddy. And one trip I came in and said, Stone, you got to let me write the story. And he said, I'll let you write the story if Bonzai is involved. All right. And that was because he trusted Bonzai. He didn't really trust me. Right? So he trusted him to just tell the story right. And once we cut the deal, 10 years, it's probably 11 years ago now, right? We started recording, we started taping, and Stone had 3 caveats. He said, listen, Porter, this is the deal. First of all, this is not the Chris Stone story, right? First of all, this is the record plant story. 2, there's something really important to me. I want to make sure that people remember who Gary Kellgren was. All right, and that's really important. Does anybody out here know who Gary Kellgren was? All right, very few of you. All right, and that's because Gary Kellgren.
It was intentional on Gary's part, though.
Well, no, not really. Gary died in '77. He drowned in his pool, right? And it was before the media, before the studio business was hot. Gary Kellgren was the genius behind Record Plant. He was the visionary. He was the engineer. He was the voice. He had the picture of what recording could become, and he was Chris's partner. Chris was the business guy. Gary was the creative guy. So he said, I want people to remember who Gary Kellgren was. So that was a big port. And then the other thing was, you got to remember, these places didn't run because Gary. They didn't run because of Chris. They ran because of hundreds of kids who worked for $1 an hour, who busted their ass, we made no money, and who made magic happen. It was really a family. It was an ecosystem that happened. So here's a list of everybody I want you and Bonzai to interview. And he gave us the list, and that's how the book happened. And Bonzai and I worked together, interviewing those people and reading virtually everything possible about Record Plant, which was immense once you start digging into it.
Yeah, I met Stone when the original Record Plant on 3rd Street was nearing its end days. He explained to me that this is like an old sports car We've tried to fix it up too many times. It's just time to get a new car. And my job was to convince the years and years of clients that the new studio, which was going to open in '86, this was in the early '80s, working up to this, needed to reassure the audience that Record Plant was so fucking legendary. It was like a mystery place. Why is this one place responsible for so many hits? It was incredible how that happened. So about 2 years before we really seriously started the book, Marty and I rallied to get a Hall of Fame Tech Award for Stone and Kellgren. Again, hardly anybody knew who Kellgren was. It had been too long. So we started the research, and we did it. We were able to. It was kind of one of the last Hall of Fame awards, and that was kind of like the springboard for the book. Little did we know it was going to take this long for the book to come out. It came out in July, and endless cocktail martini lunches where I learned how to make a martini from Stone. He used to be a bartender. He worked his way through business school as a bartender at Trader Vic's in Berkeley. Yep. Which was legendary because it was the last place where the Korea guys went off. If they could have a drink there, they would come back. Mm-hmm. And so we had our drinks in the backyard. And, there's so many stories that are not in the book, but there's plenty of stories there that have never been told before. And you get a better, accurate story, actually, from the people who were working at the studio. The second engineers, the first engineers, the tech people, the maintenance room. It was a legendary studio because it had the latest equipment always. And again, Marty mentioned the Spars group. These guys were really like their own homegrown mafia. They banded together, and we're going to talk to the manufacturers about what we want and what we want to pay. And they kind of controlled things in a weird way. So it was an organization. And Stone was kind of the figurehead in many ways. He was just so ballsy, and in his ambitions, and I guess that's it.
Well, but one other thing to add, and before we is that there were 3 record plants. All right, they were 2 businesses. All right, Stone and Kellgren owned L.A. and started New York in '68 for Jimi Hendrix. And recorded Electric Ladyland there, okay? They went off, 14 months later, they sold it to a cable company that became Warner Communications, and they split town and they moved out to the West Coast. They started LA on 3rd Street, and then a couple years later, they built up in Sausalito by the Bay, which is still operating, the only one of the studios that's still operating now, 2200, it's called 2200 Studios. So they ran the West Coast. When they split the West Coast, they needed somebody to operate the East Coast. Tom Hidley, do people know who Tom Hidley was? Because he's another character in the legend, another legendary character there. Tom Hidley was their chief engineer, and he's a big part of the story, and we hope we can get into him because he passed away a couple of months ago. But they needed somebody to run New York because New York was still operating on 44th Street, and it was busy. So they hired a guy named Roy Cicala. All right, Roy Cicala was his own legend. He ran New York, which was his own separate company, and people didn't realize it. John Lennon used to who worked in New York, used to call L.A. Record Plant West, even though they're 2 separate corporations. So when we dug into this, we decided we can't write a book around about 3 people, 3 studios, 6 trucks, too big. But we figured, what the fuck, we'll do it anyway, right? And but we didn't. We had Stone to really help us out on the West Coast operation. We weren't as connected with the East Coast, and so we really needed to. And Roy had passed away. It was because of Roy's son, Jade, and his nephew, Craig Alberino, who allowed us to do massive interviews with Roy's wife, Laurie Burton, the songwriter, Laurie Burton. It was because of Laurie that we got much of the stories. And Roy's legend and Roy's real contribution, besides being John Lennon's post-Beatles engineer and owning Record Plant East, was he was the mentor to some of the greatest engineers of our time.
Amen.
Jack Douglas, Jimmy Iovine, who else? Tom Panunzio, Bob, it's endless. And he is, he's our next project. Just like Bond said that we got Chris and Gary a Tech Award, the person who deserves tremendous accolades. And frankly, I'm doing a signing with Jack Douglas in New York next week on the book. It'll be a tribute to Roy, because Roy deserves his own recognition.
Nice. Yeah. Well,
Rough Trade on Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. Rough Trade below at Radio City.
Marty hangs out in the leather bars, so it's sort of fitting.
So let's just start out with a little premise here, because the thing about the record plant that was so unique at the time, the whole industry was changing. The whole way that recording studios was operated was changing, and that's, I think, the big headline here was that this was the first studio that was really an artist, catered to the artist, catered to the, the same kind of change was happening in England at that point. You had studios that were basically owned by networks. They were clinical. You had guys in white coats and smocks and stuff like that. The record plant was the first place where it was a hotel. It was a place where you could be creative, right?
Absolutely. The story starts, our books, is the story. Listen, the record plant went out of business in LA, 2 years ago now? Sycamore?
Right, yeah.
About 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So the story lasts, and it's still operating under a different name in Sausalito. The original Roy's Mixed Room on the 10th floor of 321 West 44th Street is still operating as Sony Music. So there are some remnants of the studio around, but the entity is gone. But our story arc starts in summer of '67 in New York, when Gary Kellgren was an assistant engineer in a studio called Mayfair Studios. He was working during the summer. Think about this, right? He had 3 clients working simultaneously. He was working with Jimi Hendrix, all right, in Mayfair. He was working with Lou Reed and Velvet Underground on White Light, White Heat, and he was working with Frank Zappa on We Were Only in It for the Money, all at one time, burning his brains out. We're going crazy, right?
$200 a week. And then he meets Chris Stone.
And Chris says, "You're not making any money, right?" And so Stone goes off and says, "You know what? I can get money." He was connected through his college roommate with a woman named Ankie Revson. She was divorced from Charles Revson, the owner of Revlon. Right? She had also made it big in the hippie stuff, right? In the hippie culture scene, because she funded Hair, right?
The first Broadway show to have full frontal nudity.
So it was a summer of love. It was '67. It was hippies. It was and you know what? If you were into technology in those days, you didn't have a computer. You weren't into AI. You weren't into social media. You weren't into video. The only thing that was out there, and we have some great. And what were you? If you were in '67 in audio, you were a tech bro. What were you into? You were into audio, right? Audio is what you do.
Building speaker systems, yeah.
So the counterculture entered the technology scene, entered the studio scene, and you know what? If you didn't want a union tape operator who would say, stop a session mid take, I got to go for lunch. You needed to serve the artist. So Gary Kellgren, who was busting his ass in Mayfair, got that, right? And he realized one thing: Jimi Hendrix fell in love with Gary Kellgren. Jimi Hendrix, who'd come over from England with some tapes he'd done, at Olympic, I guess, for Electric Lady, and he said, "I got to finish an album." Gary said, "I'll build you a studio." So he went to Stone. Stone got the money. By the next spring, record plant was up and running. And the whole culture was that it was to serve Jimmy, right? That's Gary with the chains. Yep. And Gary had another vision, all right? Gary, and there was another studio in New York. Record Plant, believe it or not, was not the first studio in New York to serve the artists like that. There was another one in the East Village called Apostolic.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
Do people remember Apostolic? All right, Apostolic, Zappa worked on there. It was the first really hippie studio in New York. But it was Apostolic because it was named after the apostles, right? Because it was 12 apostles, all right? Based on 12 tracks of that Scully tape machine in the background there, right? And you know, Eddie Kramer, who Chris and Gary hired to come and work,
and got Eddie his green card.
Got his green card.
Yeah.
You know, he's comes to New York because, you know, Gary's burning out now. They built the record plant, and he's got this 12-track tape recorder, which was not the, you know, was a little finicky, like any tape machine of those days, but it had 4 extra tracks.
It was 4 more tracks than
4 more tracks.
Yeah.
And Jimmy walks into the studio, and Jimmy says to Eddie Kramer, you know what? He's freaked out that he could have 4 more tracks, and he could put the 8 tracks on it, and he can still keep working. So there was that 12-track in the corner and Gary Kellgren, all right, that really turned on Jimmy to working at Record Plant. Also, there was another thing. It was Gary had a slogan in those days. He wanted a studio to be more a living room than a lab. Look at the drapery, right? Like a living room, right? It was not exactly the best studio in the world. The control room was funky but big. The room, you know, I've seen pictures of the room. It wasn't great, but it was dressed up to look cool and to look casual. You know, those drapes, denote the living room. And that 12-track was what it was all about. The console, by the way, was a data mix, and it was that data mix that was replaced that when Jimmy built his own studio with Eddie and John Storick downtown, they had a similar console. But that relationship between Gary Kellgren and Jimi Hendrix made the studio's reputation, and the rest is history.
And there were no clocks at Record Plant. That was one of the rules. So you never were worried about how much time you were spending, because time is money for a recording studio owner. You know, if the session tends to go on longer, you don't mind. The guys could have to stay awake, but more money comes in. Hendrix was working sometimes almost 24 hours a day. Tape was another commodity that was part of the profit scheme for a recording studio. And they were burning 2-inch tape night and day. At the time that it was being done, Kramer sort of felt that maybe the studio was just taking advantage of Jimmy a little bit by making it easy for him to work. But as time has gone by and all of those posthumous albums come out, Eddie's kind of grateful that that's the way Record Plant worked. And that creed of no clocks carried over when the movement was made to L.A. and then to Sausalito. Of course, the move to Los Angeles made the studio a little bit stranger than...
It was a different culture. There was always a different culture in LA versus New York.
Yeah. Before we get there, just so everybody understands,
I want to talk about this.
That's the invitation to the opening party. This is one of the, fortunately having access to Chris Stone's archives, we were able to find things, and the publisher was really great in producing a really high quality photographs that we came out of the archive.
I put this up because I wanted you to talk about the opening, because the opening itself was an event.
Well, the opening parties were always a big thing for Gary and Chris, right? This was the first one. It was a poppy party, right? And now we know what poppies denoted at the time, but also look at the style. This was not your average recording studio. This was psychedelic, hippy-dippy stuff, right?
This was the 60s.
This was the 60s, and March 19th, 1968, that was the opening of Record Plant.
Yep.
There would be equally interesting invitations at the studio opening in L.A., which was a brick. Which I hope we have a picture of.
Yeah, we have a picture of that here.
And also in Sausalito, if you go up to 2200 Studio, you'll see, and hold that picture in a minute. There's the brick, You can tell the story about the brick.
Yeah, the story of the brick. This is, again, Stone, he's trying to rock the boat. The post office really didn't like people mailing bricks, but I think there's a rule that you can mail a coconut. You go in Hawaii, it's a thing. So they couldn't stop that.
As long as a stamp will stick on it, right?
Yeah, and so this brick became a status symbol all across LA and probably many places else. You got a brick in the mail, and you kept it on your desk until the party. And then when you got to the party, this was the way you got into the party, and there was a bricklayer in a tuxedo who built the wall that remained at Record Plant on 3rd Street until it was torn down in 85. I have a couple bricks. Oh, in fact, Stone's wife gave me Gary Kellgren's brick, and I gave it to his widow at a book signing we had in Hollywood.
Love it.
It was a big thrill for her too. So this is just, and then it happened again in Sausalito, which you can still visit, I guess, or you can book the studio.
If you go in the lobby at Sausalito, you'll see the invitations there on the wall, still on the wall. It was like a yin yang, the half of a yin yang. It made out of redwood. And those invitations were always a big part of the whole scene, and it was a way of making noise, marketing. And listen, what made Record Plant? It was casual. It served the artist. Always had the latest technology, like I see over there, like Eventides. All right, so we can. So congratulations to you. You maybe tell some stories right about that. But the Eventides, they were the first. They were first with a 12-track. Then Jimmy wanted a 16-track. They got the 16-track. Then Hidley came into the picture. And let's talk a little bit about Hidley. And because I think Hidley's for this group is an important figure, but he was also critical to the success of Record Plant. They were working. Chris and Gary are thinking about moving to New York. They got a bite. Gary's going to become a millionaire, but they're ready to move out to L.A. in 1969, and Hendrix comes back from L.A. He'd worked in a studio off Highland called TTG. Anybody know about TTG? All right, another historic studio. You've been there? You were there? No, but Hidley was the chief engineer. Hidley had moved out of there from A&R. He was building a 24-track machine, and he had an idea for a studio monitor that blew away Hendrix. Right, so Hendrix comes to New York. He tells Chris and Gary, "You got to go out there and meet this guy Hidley." They get on a plane. They go out there, and in fact, they're blown away. They hear these monitors. They're amazing. They see this
monitor that Hendrix couldn't blow out. Basically,
well, not yet. We'll get to that story, but in a minute. But so they can't afford him, but they hire Hidley right away. Hidley's hired. Hidley starts building Studio A on 3rd Street in L.A. And the rest is history. He introduces several things that are unique, studio designs. But most significantly for this room was the invention of what became known as the Hidley monitor. And there's an interesting story in the early days of LA of how that monitor came about, and maybe you can tell the story, Bonds.
Yeah, well, this takes us back to Bill Szymczyk. Now, he's the producer of the Eagles, most people know, but he went way back with Joe Walsh, too. And they were working on an album, the James Gang record, and they had a song called The Bomber that was causing problems with the monitors. I think they had really expensive, gigantic, top-of-the-line tannoys. And almost every day, it's Szymczyk and Joe Walsh, and they want to play loud. I mean, they're getting some extra juice out of the equipment, and it's loud. That's the way they worked. And every day, they would damage speakers. They would actually start smoking and blow up and fall off the walls. And they'd call Stone and say, "Stone, he said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The record company will pay for it." This was kind of another typical type of economic arrangement that Chris Stone had.
The days when they had big budgets.
Yes, big budgets. And So finally, they said we gotta stop this. Not every day do we have to blow up speakers. So they called in Hidley, and Hidley designed and built a studio. I think they tried it out on the roof so they didn't blow the walls.
He built it on the roof.
Yeah, built it on the roof, and finally developed a monitor that Joe Walsh and Bill Simzik couldn't blow up. And now we can listen to the Bomber in full volume.
But 1,000 studios worldwide later, that was Hidley's contribution, and I would assume we'd all agree they were the reference monitor for the period of the time for many throughout the world. That's it.
There you go.
So, but that was only one of the many contributions that Hidley is known for. The compression ceiling in the control room. His control rooms sounded amazing. Not only with the monitors, but they were built to really direct the sounds to the ears of the artist, sitting behind the console. Hidley understood how to make good sound, and Stone knew how to get it paid for, and Stone also knew how to market it, because he knew that what better experience for an artist than to hear a playback that blew an artist's mind, right? You put an artist behind that a cool console in a great sounding room, they're going to come back for more. And that was the unique balance between those three guys. Hidley was the technical genius, Gary was the flair, the artist, the creative visionary, and Stone was the guy who figured out how to pay for it. And they got very successful in LA pretty fast. They had the magic touch again, and Gary soon bought his first Rolls Royce. Purple Rolls with license plates that were very unique and noted around the music business in LA. The license plate read "Greed," right? So Stone, and they parked it in the parking lot, and everybody in LA knew Wood Kellgren was rolling around in this purple Rolls called Greed.
Let me tell the story about. So now Kellgren's got his Rolls, which became pretty famous. George Harrison loved borrowing it. I mean, you could see these guys driving around town. It was all promotion for the studio, too. Who the hell are those guys in this, record plant? And, of course, the artists, they looked at the liner notes and tried to find out which studios, and almost every top record was done at Record Plant. Not everyone, but so many were done, New York, L.A. So Stone's getting rich, too. So he goes to the Mercedes dealership to get, the top of the line Mercedes, and he picks out, the one he wants. We'll tell you what his license plate said in a minute. And the salesman said something very interesting to Stone that appealed to Stone's. He had an MBA in business. Why don't you could lease this equipment? You could lease the car. You don't have to buy it. And Stone went, oh, that's pretty cool. Well, the next thing he does is he starts leasing equipment for the studio. Tape recorders then cost $100,000 maybe, or a console.
Console was $100,000, $40,000.
Went up. They were hugely expensive. And leasing the equipment really made a lot of sense for the business model that Stone and Kellgren had developed.
Well, especially because equipment would then get outdated, and you'd want the next big thing, and so you had a replacement cycle. It
just made a lot of sense. Yeah. And Stone's license plate read "Greed."
No, deduct.
Sorry.
So it was greed.
I always get those two things mixed.
It was greed and deduct, and it was Stone's. When we interviewed him, Phil Ryan was Stone's lawyer for many years. Greed and deduct. We said greed. He said greed and deduct. You ever wonder who ended up with all the money? So that was Stone was a great, very smart businessman, and leasing equipment became the trend. Years later, who was that? Who did all the leasing on the SSLs in New York? Was it Sandy Schneider? Was that? I can't remember, but leasing became the way that you finance the studio. So,
how are we doing, Dan?
Good.
I'm thinking about Marty and I have been doing the podcast circuit. We've been interviewed by tons. scores of people since the summer, and that's why we have become this vaudeville act. Marty, come on!
I knew this already. I was like, I just got to put a nickel in you guys, and I can sit back.
All right, Daniel, let's earn your nickel. Let's go. Hit us with a question.
Well, I think songs is one of.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of the artists that worked there.
Yeah, the BBC asked us, can you pick 8 songs? So
Yes. Well, and the pictures you gave me are in completely disarrayed order and everything. But here's one.
All right, so that's
Talk about this one.
Okay, so we talked about the 3 studios, right? But we didn't talk about the mobile units, right? Because a record plant was known for its trucks. It was also an era of concerts and concert recording and live albums. And Stone loved the business. He said, "Hey, you get a truck, you roll it in, the artist puts on a concert, and you get a album out of it." Well, the first album that was recorded by a record plant truck was Concert for Bangladesh. And Concert for Bangladesh was a fascinating story because Stone and Kellgren were out in LA. They didn't own a truck. The only truck around was Wally Heider. And Wally Heider had this small white truck that it was a piece of crap that he wanted to unload, right? And he figured he'd cut a deal with Stone. He'd lease it to Stone. He cut a deal with Stone, and Wally and Stone had an understanding, right? Wally Heider had said, "Okay, you can do all the concerts on the east side." And this was, talk about the mob. They were splitting up the country, right? Stone had the record plant had the East Coast. Heider had the West Coast, right? And so it became legendary. But the white truck in New York was legendary. And its first concert was the Concert for Bangladesh. Right, so Kellgren, they roll the truck to New York. They park it at Madison Square Garden, and Phil Spector wants the party. Who's producing it for George Harrison? Wants the party in the truck. He wants to drink, he wants to smoke, he wants to bring his posse. There's no room in this play in that tiny truck for anything more than a couple of engineers and with two tape machines, because Heider taught Stone a really good lesson that he never forgot, which is you always roll a backup because you can sell that idea to any producer that this is live. You always want to run 2 machines. The 2 machines is twice as much tape, twice as much gear. But you have you can't fit two machines. So Kellgren had an idea. We'll put the second Ampex on the lift in the back, right? They roll it out in the lift. The tape machine falls off the back and crashes. I see some shaking your head, right? Well, Kellgren goes to his staff, go back up to 44th Street, roll another machine down, and they did. They did run it. They did make it happen. But they had never done a live concert before. Okay, they'd never done a live concert before. Kellgren never did a live concert before, right? So it didn't really exactly sound so good. But they had Tom Scott, who worked for Heider. They had Tom Fly, another great engineer who worked for Gary and Chris for many years, and should get recognition himself for what he accomplished. But when they went back to the studio to the mix, it didn't sound so good, right? Well, and everybody was freaking out because this was an album. This was more than an album. This was going to feed starving. This album was going to feed starving children, right? This had cultural, economic, human implications. If it was a shitty album and it didn't sell, you know what? Well, they decided to get on a plane and work and Phil Spector, and get Phil Spector to fix the tapes. And everybody knows the legends of Phil Spector, and everybody knows what's happened in his later career. But one thing we have to remember of Phil Spector in his heyday, he had amazing skills. He was a genius.
He was a freaking genius.
He was a genius. And this picture was Spector with Harrison in, I think it was A&M. I'm not sure. I don't know where the location is. But this was basically, they brought the tapes to Spector. Spector threw everybody out of the studio, but him and his engineer, and he fixed the tapes. And the result is history. So that's the background on that picture.
I think we have something with Stevie. Let's see.
Wait a second.
Yeah. Let's go back to this one. Hang on. This is yeah. Let's talk about.
There's
the
my God! There's mirrors on the ceiling.
Yeah, and the whole idea of creating a space where the artists could get comfortable. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Creative.
Yes.
You didn't have to take a
Creative.
break.
Yes.
Of course, the
As
clock.
opposed to procreative,
The
yes.
clock is running, even if you're in your bedroom.
Exactly.
But there were 3 rooms, kind of 3 and a half. There was the sissy room that was all frilly and, like a real boudoir, but very feminine and everything. And then there was the rack room, which they, of course, only used for making sound effects. But that was a unique room, too. And then there was the boat room, which had portholes. Within the studio, you could go into another world to summon up your gods and demons of creativity. And there was a secret room underneath there that you could hide in.
It was called the Anne Frank room.
The Anne Frank room, which reminds me of Sausalito, because Sly Stone had a special room built for him.
Get to that.
Yeah,
Pit.
exactly.
Get that. But I think the important thing was that Kellgren went beyond. When he went to LA, he had space. Remember, New York is tight. You got an elevator, you got small hallways, you have studios. You can't really, there's not much room
Everything
to
is
create.
vertical and cramped.
Right, it's
Yeah.
vertical and cramped. It's New York, right? In LA, you have space, all right? So he took over this old space on 3rd Street. He could grow it, he could build it, he could come up with all these wackiest ideas that he wanted. The studio on 3rd Street used to be a film studio where Tarzan movies were made. And in the back, he had room for the bedrooms. Now, Kellgren had a kinky side, all right? And I won't go into too many details, but they definitely had a kinky side. While in New York, used to hang out down in the meatpacking district and at a club called the Hellfire Club. And a Hellfire Club had rooms for every fetish. So this was the inspiration behind the hotel rooms in the back of 3rd Street and Record Plant. Now, the thing about these rooms were they served the purpose. If you were a session musician, you needed a crash, you could have it. If you were the Eagles working on a song called Hotel California, you needed a place to write, you could do it there too. If you had girlfriends, whatever, you could do it too. But they reflected a culture where, like Daniel said, we served the artists. You served every creature comfort. And it really defined sex, drugs, and rock and roll of the period. And yes, drugs were a big part of it, no question about it. The consoles at Record Plant, the APIs had small little mirrors embedded in the consoles, and it was up to the assistants every morning to make sure that there were sharp razor blades left for every if they wanted to be used.
Not for splicing tape, yeah.
Not to splice the tape. So it was. Listen, it was odd. It was definitely sex, drugs, and rock and roll to the nth degree.
And they cut some great records. I mean,
oh, we forgot about those.
Yeah,
somehow.
that too. Yeah.
Well, by the way, it worked, right? Whatever the formula, it worked.
Yep.
And
What do we have here? Oh, okay, so let's
That's
talk.
Stone.
Yeah, that's Stone, and this is
That's on
Proud
3rd.
Papa.
That's Stone, yeah.
Yeah.
I think those are bell bottoms. That door didn't really operate. That was on 3rd Street.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
So that's Sausalito, all right. And Sausalito was
It was hippie. It was more hippie
Well,
than San Francisco. hippie.
Expensive hippie.
Yeah.
The woodwork was done by the guys who built the Trident, which was a hangout in those days.
Mm-hmm.
We went to visit, and the woodwork is like, it would be impossible to do now. It would be so, you'd need craftsmen, you would need expensive wood, all sorts of things that were done.
But I think Sausalito being the third studio, there were also aspects there that they were almost getting a little big for their britches.
Well, I think part of it. Listen, I think it was a business move. All right. Not only there were a couple of reasons it was a good business move. One, the only other big studio that was happening in those days was Hyder, and it was a dump in Sausalito, right? And it was right next door to a methadone clinic, and it was not up to Gary Kellgren's style, right? The second thing though that we have to understand is Record Plant on 3rd Street got a little crazy. It could get crazy. It could be a party scene. You had to be buzzed in. That's the name of our book, Buzz Me In. You had to be buzzed in, and they had a jacuzzi. Not only the back rooms, it had a jacuzzi, which is famous for. So it got too crazy for people. I think it was Graham Nash who said, they worked at Hyder's because they needed to get away from the craziness of a Record Plant. So Stone was losing business to people who want to work in studios in LA that were a little less crazy, a little more private, a little less. And it was also a period when there was Caribou Ranch was happening. And some of the vacation resort studios were becoming the thing. Matt Gemmerman had a hotel on Ocean or bedrooms on Ocean for the people working Criteria. So it was a thing. So they built Sausalito as a getaway, and there was definitely, although I said there was really 3 studios, in a sense, there's really 2 businesses. One, New York, which we haven't really talked enough about, and we should talk about it more. But LA and Sausalito were basically part of the same business, and artists were going back and forth, up and down, depending on whether they wanted to get away. Equipment was moved back and forth, and they were the same. They were pretty much the same business. And this was Gary. If you ever get a chance to go up there, and I really encourage everybody to try to get in there because a lot of it is preserved. It's a work of art.
It was rock wall too. You can see the rock wall in the background there. Very few modern studios have a rock wall, but back in the 70s, 80s, almost every studio, the front wall was rock. Yeah, exactly. That was one of his touches.
Well, a lot of that was also Kellgren. There was a line. Kellgren wanted natural materials: the wood, rock, stone, exactly. And there was a comment when they were building L.A. Everybody said, this is crazy, and but nobody thought it was going to work. But Hidley and Kellgren figured out how to make it work.
So this is Tonto. This is Stevie with Bob Margouleff and
Malcolm Cecil.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Studio B.
That a little bit.
This is Studio B, and this was in L.A., which was designed. This was Stone again. Okay, we
want you to come to the studio. We want you to work at the studio, so we're going to build you a studio. We'll accommodate. Tonto, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, was the original neo-timbral orchestra, and it was basically a hodgepodge of synthesizers that was built by Malcolm Cecil and Bob Margouleff to essentially accommodate Stevie. Well, it was built before Stevie.
And it was an orchestra. It basically assembled Moog and ARP and various and
made all of these synthesizers that were from different manufacturers, ran on different voltages and everything. Somehow or another, made them all run together.
Yes.
In a quad room. A quad room.
Yes, exactly.
So when Stevie got into the middle of that room, he was surrounded by sound, by the music. And with these 2 mad scientists, he could come up with ideas that he'd never been able to materialize. And these guys would noodle around and unplug and do this. And it was the kind of situation where it really was hands-on for everybody in the studio.
And this was Stevie's 3 biggest albums, really. I mean,
the Talking Book,
Living for the City, and I mean, all of the epic tunes that came out of Stevie Wonder's career that really, when he graduated from being Little Stevie Wonder to being Stevie Wonder, these were the songs that really launched all this creative.
They recorded 300 songs in Studio B, made three albums, and many of those songs, although it wasn't recorded exclusively at Record Plant, Songs in the Key of Life, I'd include some of those songs as well in that album. So it was a historic period of time. Tonto played a significant role in that, as did Malcolm and Bob Margouleff.
Superstition was recorded.
Electronic music got funky.
Yeah, and this was all based around the fact that he built them a studio to accommodate what they.
Well, there was a little problem, if you ever get to, it's up in Banff, I think, right?
No,
Calgary?
It's in Calgary.
Calgary, yeah. So it's up in Calgary now. It's huge, and if you couldn't, you needed a room to accommodate it. Right? You couldn't move it in a room, and you couldn't rent that room, so you had to block book a studio. Now, Stone had made a fortune, and they both got rich by having a Jimi Hendrix as a client, right? And they knew if you have a client who can book a room, you can build a second room and a third room, and you can make a living, right? You can make a good amount of money. So getting a deal with Margouleff, Cecil, and Stevie Wonder, they booked Studio B for a year, and in fact. You done?
I'm just telling Margouleff there's a picture
All right. Hi, Bob.
Yeah. Hi, Bob.
Hey, Bobby.
Hey,
Hey,
Bob.
Bob. We miss you.
So anyway, okay. All right. Anyway,
We're well connected.
we connected it.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, just to finish the story, they
Bob was
needed a
supposed to
room.
be here today, you know.
Studio B and record plant was built by John Stork, who had built Electric Lady, and Stone hired him to bring him out. And it was not a big room. It was not a fancy room, but it gave Bob and Malcolm room for Tonto, and it gave Stevie a home that he could work for 3.5, 4 years.
Yep. And I actually, Bob was supposed to be here today, and I have his PowerPoint, including other pictures of Tonto and everything in there. But, Bob's busy talking on the phone right now. So, yeah. Anyway, let's see what else we got here. Oh, here's a nice one.
Yeah, actually, that this was taken later. This is
this is from a later edition of.
That's
Keltner,
We've got some famous photographers in the book, including me. This is my photo of Keltner, and we're pretty good friends after all these years. This was in 1986. I was trying to get an interview with Jim. And he just kept evading me, and he says, "Well, I have to go down to Pasty, a cymbal company in Orange County, today." I said, "Can I go?" So I interviewed him in his Mercedes as we went down there. But we went to great lengths with Keltner and with Cooch,
Yeah.
Danny Korchmar, to fact check what we had written. Because there's one example of the different stories that people remember. That's why it's valuable, really, to get the stories nailed down as early as possible. Because memories, all of your memories, the more you talk about it, the more you're embellishing it each time you want. But we spent days and Zooming with Keltner and Cooch. To make sure that our story, because we were talking about a night at Record Plant. Sunday nights at Record Plant was the Jim Keltner Fan Club Hour, which was named by George Harrison as kind of a joke, referring to Paul's first album, which had joined the Wings fan club. It said, well, why don't we have the Jim Keltner fan club? So this became a notorious Sunday night thing, and anybody, not anybody could get in. You had to get buzzed in, and some crazy shit happened. One or two good records came out of it. One ended up on a Mick Jagger. It was probably the only time.
Too Many Cooks. Too Many Cooks is a great song that came out of one of those sessions, and it was not only a Mick Jagger vocal, but it was produced by John Lennon, and amazing super session, so to speak, a Record Plant. But so Keltner was also not having a drummer around like Keltner brought the artists, right, and having a house band with David Foster. And that was the house band at Record Plant. The Attitudes. Who else was? But just to finish before we go there, I think I want to follow up on David's point and it's not about Keltner as much about Phil Spector, because we found that there's some legends about Record Plant that we really need to dig into. And when you're dealing with stories that are 50 plus years old, you hear a lot of different angles. So there's a famous story about the night that supposedly. Phil Spector almost killed John Lennon in the studio with a gun. Now we know what happened with guns and Phil Spector years later, but if you watch the HBO biopic on Spector, you do see a scene which was at A&M of a gun going off in the studio, and there were guns in those days. People were packing a lot, particularly in New York. But there is this legendary story that we heard dozens of different ways, and we weren't even sure it really happened. So what we did is if you read the book, you'll see that we tell everybody's different variation on the story. But we weren't quite sure that it really did happen, all right, until we talked to one of the engineers who said years later, when they were tearing down 3rd Street, Chris Stone had this beautiful wood paneling in his office. And he took the wood paneling and put it back because he thought he'd need it for some future project. And that future project came up about 10 years later, and he started shaving the wood and shaping the wood and cleaning up the wood. And he's shaving the wood, and he hits something, right? And he hits something, and he digs out a bullet.
Two.
Right? 2 bullets. It was 2 bullets. So those gunshots supposedly had happened outside Stone's office, all right, in the canteen, and so those bullets were in fact found.
They were found, but still the stories about everybody else had different ideas. Some said that it happened in the jacuzzi. It went off in the jacuzzi. Also, Spector was in the crapper, and he dropped the gun, and the gun went off.
Of course.
So,
yeah, we knew that happened.
We're referencing kind of a Kurosawa movie, Rashomon, which is told from only three different standpoints. But everybody's view, each one of you, your view of what's going on here today is different from the other guy next to you.
Yeah.
So that's...
And 50 years from now, it'll be even more so.
And that's one of the things we explored. We had to be true to the studio as best as we could possibly find out. And that depended on hundreds and hundreds of people that told us our stories that you can read about.
This is a nice one here. You want to talk a little bit about that?
This is obviously that's Gary Calgary many years later with his biggest customer Stevie Wonder we just talked about. But this is an interesting photo because it's from a series that was from a photo that essay in People magazine. All right, 1975. And it's an interesting, and it was all about, the article, if you read it, was about Kellgren and Stone had a concept those days of rock and roll hotels. They not only wanted to be in the studio business, but they wanted to create, long before hard rock, they wanted to build a chain of rock and roll hotels around the country where rock stars could go and hang out and crash while they were on tour. So this photo was from that session, and there are a lot of other photos that you may see later, but it was important for a lot of reasons. And when we talk about the legend of rock, of legends at Record Plant, the big question is, was Record Plant the real Hotel California? Right? Now that's a big question, and we don't make a stand. We would never say it's the real Hotel California. But this picture was taken from an article in People magazine. Okay, so mass market magazine in those days that basically talked about how Stone and Kellgren had all these great artists. They were making all these great records. They were making all these hits. They were making all this money, and their next idea was to build a chain of hotels. That article was in every studio at Record Plant, and was throughout the studio, even when the Eagles moved in to record the album that became Hotel California. Now, let me address a couple of things. One, Rolling Stone magazine, at my urging, interviewed Don Henley once and said, "Don, was Record Plant the real Hotel California?" And he said, absolutely not. We recorded there. We did some, but truthfully, the guitar solo and much of it actually happened down in Criteria, although it was written at the studio, and they worked there for 9 months on that album. All right, so he said that. But there's so many similarities. We showed you the mirrors on the ceiling. Kellgren loved pink Corbel champagne. It was started in '69, which is there was a very tempting young lady in the front who greeted them and took them down some long hallways. There was a courtyard. There was a courtyard outside. So there were so many similarities. Was it the real Hotel California? I wouldn't say it, but did it inspire the lyrics? There was a nightman who had to buzz you in, right? There was too many similarities to be ignored. Let's leave it at that. But that was from the People magazine. And apparently we have 5 minutes?
Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
All right.
So
are you going to throw us out?
We should have made this like a 2-hour thing, But and here's another illustration of that.
That's Gary Kellgren's wife, Marta, in one of the other hotel rooms. That's the rack room.
It's the rack room.
And noted for its S&M details.
Let's see. There's a nice one. The Zappa thing.
Zappa plays a really important role in the narrative, in the story arc, because not only was he working with Gary, and we're only in it for the money, in the summer of '67, but he was a constant customer, and he was there throughout the period. He was there when Gary died with his girlfriend in a double drowning in summer of '77, in his mansion off Sunset. And Zappa was in the studio that night as well. So Zappa's an important figure, and he plays a significant role in the story. Michael Bronstein, who some of you may know, was a big engineer at Record Plant, defined the term studio tan. You ever heard the studio tan? Well, that was a joke between Frank and Michael Bronstein that took place at Record Plant. And that's where that came from.
Yeah, you're looking at a photograph now, and we spent a lot of time on finding photos and getting permission to use them. So it's a really handsome book with about, how many, 300 photos?
Yeah, and we can leaf through a few of these while you're talking.
And also, we created a Spotify list.
Hold it, don't throw it. This is important because, as I said, the story arc, just to take you through it, Gary died in the summer of '77, and everybody thought there was a ghost at Record Plant. The day after he died, the studio in New York, Fritz, every studio went crazy. Machines broke, everything went wrong, and several months later, in January '77, Studio C, which was the premier room on 3rd Street, burned to the ground. So that's that story.
Yep.
And we've talked a lot about LA. I just want to tell one favorite story that we can't, and because it took place in New York. And it's important to note that the studio is not only its own little claustrophobic world unto itself, no clocks, no windows, but people had to go out to restaurants, they had to drive there, so it was very much part of the environment. New York was part of Times Square. LA was it was down the hill from Sunset Strip. Sausalito was right on the bay in Marin County, right? But Times Square played a significant role in the story of New York.
Times Square was a lot different back then.
It was a seedy, funky, druggy, sex, drugs, and rock and roll place.
It was very funky.
It was funky. And Aerosmith was working with Jack Douglas there on Toys in the Attic in 75. 75, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're working on it, trying to get a hit. They're working upstairs in the 10th floor studio, which had been built for Jimi Hendrix to keep his business. And they say, you know what, we can't get this lick. They have a lick. Joe Perry has a lick, and they can't get a lyric. So they said, let's get the hell out of here. So they go for a walk, and they go to it's Times Square. Not only is it porno places and drug addicts, but it's first-run movie theaters. And one of the movies that's playing in Times Square that day was Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks. So they go in there, they watch the movie, and there's a scene, if you've ever seen it, with Marty Feldman as the hunchback, right? And they say to him, let's go, and he says, okay, walk this way, and he does the shuffle, right? Yep. You can tell me, you know where this is going, right? So the band cracks up, and they walk back through Times Square, back to Record Plant, upstairs to the 10th floor, and they're doing the Hunchback Shuffle. And Steve Tyler says, "Give me a minute." He goes into the stairwell. He writes the lyrics to "Walk This Way," and that song was born. And it was a product of Times Square.
Yeah. And a product of that era in the studio, really. Yeah. Yep. And I think we have to
precursor to hip hop too.
Yes.
And since we're talking 50 years ago in New York, one other album happened that a couple months later, Born to Run. And Springsteen moved in. Lennon was Lennon's home. It's important to remember that it was Lennon's home. And Lennon did all his post-Beatles work, starting with Imagine, through Mind Games, Walls and Bridges, and the Rock and Roll album, and finally some of Double Fantasy at Record Plant, New York.
And you'll recognize this photo here.
And that's Darkness. That's on the 10th floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Porter. It's really been fun. And I thank all of you for being here.
Thank all of you for being here.
It's the story. Yeah. But basically, the only reason Bruce Springsteen was able to move into Record Plant, New York, and this is really important, is because John Lennon retired and moved out of the studio.
Yep.
Studio was available, and Bruce moved in.
And he didn't get the A-list people either.
No,
He really got the bargain
He didn't
rate.
get Royce LaCalla. He didn't get Shelley Yakus. He didn't get James Messina, who were the A-list guys. He got the assistants. He got Jimmy Iovine and Tom Panunzio. All the assistants. He didn't rate.
Yep.
And this album, there was a roof on the 10th floor that's famous for a couple of sessions. This is from Darkness, but it's also famous for Parallel Lines, Blondie.
And thank you, Mr. Keller.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Mr. Porter and Mr. Goggin here.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I'm sorry we didn't book this for 2 hours.
Anybody want one of these? We got these signed for you guys.
Yep.
You want to have that?
Yeah. Here we are.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.